Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RosieCon Book Festival 2021. I'm so excited that you could join us this evening. My name is Diane Rogers. I am the school librarian at Ben Davis Ninth Grade Center in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am also the founding member and steering committee chair of the RosieCon Book Festival. I'm so excited that you decided to join us tonight for our Own Voices panel. Tonight's author panel is the fifth in a series of virtual events, all based on the books and authors from the Elliott Rosewater, Indiana high school book list. This is a recommended reading list of contemporary titles for teens in the state of Indiana. The Rosewater list is renewed every year with new and exciting books and is sponsored by the Indiana Library Federation. Near the end of each school year, teen readers from across the state vote for their favorite book from the list, and the winning title is given the Rosewater Award. Voting is online and is currently open, so log on to the Indiana Library Federation website, find the book awards, and vote for your favorite novel. Voting is open now through the end of April every school year. Before I officially begin events this evening, I do want to formally thank our sponsors of this festival. Money and support has been provided by the Lilly Endowment for the Arts, the Indianapolis Foundation Library Fund, and Wayne Township Schools to support RosieCon Book Festival. Thank you all, our sponsors, for your support. Now for our panel tonight. It's called #Own Voices. We will be talking with authors who include original experiences in their writing, as many authors do. But these authors are from historically marginalized groups of people in America. Tonight's moderator is Kirsten Weaver. She is a librarian with Indianapolis Public Library and is the head teen programmer there. Kirsten, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Hello.
Kirsten, take it away.
Hi. So as Diane said, I am Kirsten Weaver. I'm the teen programming specialist for the Indianapolis Public Library. And tonight we've got some great authors with us. We're going to be talking about Own Voices, as Diane said, and just to repeat, because I think it can always bear repeating, those are our characters that represent people from groups that have been previously marginalized, including ethnic minorities, different sexual orientations, and also identities, and those with disabilities. And tonight we have, let's start with Jennifer Clement. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi there. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Oh, there I am.
We also have Jay Coles. Hi, Jay.
Hi, I'm Jay Coles, author of Tyler Johnson Was Here and the upcoming Things We Couldn't Say, and I am so thrilled to be here.
We have G. Neri, otherwise known as Greg.
Everybody, how's it going? I've written a lot of different kinds of books for young people, like graphic novels like Yummy and Grand Theft Horse, and novels like Ghetto Cowboy. And I write all kinds of fiction and nonfiction, but they're all inspired by real life and unheard voices.
Okay, we have Leigh Johnson with us tonight.
Hey y'all, I'm Leigh Johnson. I'm the author of a couple forthcoming books for children and young adults, but most recently I'm the author of You Should See Me in a Crown and Rise to the Sun, which is coming out on July 6th.
And last but not least, we have Alexandra Moneer.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm the author of The Final Six and its sequel, The Life Below. The Final Six is the one that's on the Rosewater list, but I don't have that in this desk for some reason. And I'm also the author of the new Black Canary novel for DC Icons.
Awesome, great. Okay, well, let's get rolling. So my first question for you all is, why do you think books written in own voices are so important? And I'm going to kind of go around and get an answer from everybody. So let's go backwards order from how we were introduced. So let's start with Alexandra.
Sure. So for me, I was growing up and basically still a kid in the aftermath of 9/11. And being from a Middle Eastern family, it was really weird how just overnight the way people kind of treated my family was so different, even though my family's Iranian. Iran had nothing to do with the terrorist attacks, but still, it's like, people just think Middle Eastern is a monolith. And just the scapegoating that we're seeing right now, sadly, with the Asian American community is very much like what I went through. And I just remember at that time, Harry Potter was sort of at the height of popularity, and there were so many great, amazing adventure stories. And I just kept wishing like I would see someone that had like a Middle Eastern name, or that had an accent like my family, or just something in pop culture that would make people stop thinking that if you come from this part of the world, you're in the axis of evil. And, the only representation at that time was very much like terrorist oriented TV shows. And so for me, it just became very important to really try and write something where young people could see that just because, you're not blonde, or just because you have a last name that's different, or your family just comes from a completely different culture, you're still every bit as worthy, your stories still matter, you can still be the heroine, and, you could be the Hermione Granger. Like that's just what I really wanted. And so I just knew once I got to the point where I could do that, I really wanted to be able to.
Great. Leah.
Yeah, so I started writing You Should See Me in a Crown in 2018, right? And that year, CCBC, which is a sort of think tank that comes out of the University of Wisconsin, had released a study of all the diversity numbers in children's literature. And of all of traditional publishing over the course of the 3 years prior to 2018, there had been 20 books where the main character was a Black girl. And out of those 20 books, there was only one that had a Black queer girl at the center. And this was in my adulthood, right? So imagine how bleak it was when I was growing up. And so when it was time for me to start developing a language for my own queerness, for me to start to understand my identity, I was looking around trying to get a blueprint for what it would mean to be all these different identities existing inside the same body, and also move through the world in a way that didn't center trauma. And I was coming up pretty empty. And so, the stories that taught me a language for queerness were YA novels about queer white boys, generally speaking. I read a lot of David Levithan in that era. And so I knew intimately, and have known over the course of my life, how important it is to be able to see myself in the pages of a book, and how permission giving it is to see someone who looks like you move through the world similarly to how you move through the world, and also have an ending in which they can get joy that isn't in exchange for trauma. And so I think that it's like the greatest gift of my life to be able to write books that write us into existence.
Awesome. Greg.
So I do normally a lot of traveling, school visits around the country, and I think of this one time is very representative of this idea. And I was at a school in a really hard hit area in Michigan, and there had been shootings there, and this school had basically been blackballed by all the other schools. Like no other school, every school refused to send their sports team to that school to play them, or have them, come to their school, because the perception was that this was a school full of thugs and, it was dangerous. And I was meeting with these, teenagers, and they were so frustrated and angry, literally shaking with anger at this perception, because they were like, this is not us. People don't understand, like, we're regular people. And I said, look, you can't blame people for what they think. They only know what they know. And it's our job to use our voices to change the narrative. So I'm always telling young people, like, you have a voice, you have to use it. You can't expect people to know your story unless you tell it. And, part of my job is, one, getting young people to tell their stories, and two, tell stories that represent those unheard voices as well. So that moment kind of defined a lot of, what I'm trying to do.
Great. Jay.
Yeah, my answer would be a combination of what everyone else said. I don't have anything super profound to add aside from, I also do a lot of school visits and pre-pandemic, I was traveling all over the country, talking to high schoolers and middle schoolers, and particularly students who go to schools in more under-resourced areas, which are usually Black and brown. And getting to hear from these students who've read my book or who have heard about me, getting to hear just how inspired they were from reading a book about Black characters. I mean, there's a brown boy on the cover of Tyler Johnson Was Here and my next book. And
surrounded by flowers, Jay.
Yeah,
like that was so revolutionary when I saw it the first time. I was like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it paints them in a way that's like completely contrary to like what the media is putting out there for a lot of Black and brown boys and girls out there. And so I think like about those moments that I have with those kids and how life-giving it is to see themselves reflected in books. And that takes me back to when I was a kid. And the very first time I read a book that reflected my experience was Walter Dean Myers. And just having a very emotional response to like what I was reading, because I had grown up reading all the Harry Potter stuff and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Captain Underpants, all those things. And it wasn't a whole lot of like Black and brown characters or experiences talked about in those books. And so, yeah, I think it's important to continue to remind young Black and brown people just how important their voice and their stories are. And we're only just beginning. And I'm excited I get to play a small role in that with my books.
Jennifer.
So I guess in my novels, they're not exactly my voice or exactly my story, although I'm in there because I've written them. So I would say that in my novels, I'm writing a lot about things that hurt, that worry me, that disturb me in a very deep way. In terms of my own story, I've written a memoir, Widow Basquiat. Here it is in Spanish. I'm very sorry that I don't happen to have it in English, but it's the same cover, which is a memoir about my time in New York from 1978 till 1988. And so that's a memoir about that time. And it has, stories of things that I personally lived, but within the context of memoir. Yeah.
Okay. On behalf of everybody, I'm going to say thank you for writing the stories that you all write, because I know when I was a kid, we didn't have any of those things. And even now, I'm reveling in reading these stories, even at my age. Before we move on, I will point out to our viewers that they can ask questions in the Zoom Q&A, also on the YouTube chat, if they have questions. But my next question for you all is that I know everybody says write what you know, but when you write, is it a conscious decision to be your own voices, or is it just something that happens during your process?
Well, I always think I spin that. I always say I write about what I don't know, which is, I do know it, but I'm tapping into new places, specific communities or stories that I may not have personally known about before, and most people don't know about, but I have connected to it in a way that becomes personal. And those voices just like kind of take over me and I can't help it. It's like a lot of writers probably feel this way too, like you're channeling voices, but if I have one talent, it's not that I'm any kind of brilliant writer, but I think I'm a good listener and I can bring those voices into a story.
Equally important.
I love that. There's one of my favorite writers is actually not a fiction writer at all. It's Nicole Jones, who works for New York Times Magazine, and she was talking about her storytelling process one time. She was reporting on public schools and like the segregation of public schools in New York City, and she was saying anytime you tell a story, the thing that is most interesting is not where the frame is. Like the frame in any community is going to be on the first person you think about. But if you shift the frame slightly to the left or the right, there are people that you never would have thought to tell a story about. And that's where the real story is. And so I'm compelled by who is outside of the frame, because I think that's where the spotlight should be. We've heard so much about the people inside of the frame that, like, I'm trying to do what hasn't been done yet or hasn't been done often. And that's like to tell these stories about these folks that often get ignored. And so I guess that's a conscious decision, but also it's like, I'm the girl outside of the frame. So like, you know, when we talk about writing what we know, I'm most interested in it because it's what I understand the best, but also I'm still the most confused by, I think.
Yeah. And for me, I feel like, I mean, when I first started writing or taking writing seriously, and I wrote my first couple manuscripts, all the characters were white because I was like, this is the thing that's going to sell. This is the thing that people are going to want to read, because that was all that I was exposed to primarily in my teenhood and adolescence. And I had to kind of like unlearn, you know, the like notion or the lie that like my voice didn't matter, that people who looked like me or people who had experiences like me, there was no room for those stories like on the bookshelf. And I had to like teach myself how to like almost love myself first in order to like start writing myself into stories. And so I do very much think it is a conscious like decision that I make every time. You know, every time I open up a document, I'm kind of like, well, I definitely know I want these characters to be representative of like my friend group, my family, the people that I love, my communities that I'm a part of. And I don't ever want to get back to that place where I started, where I was like, you know, we just need more white stories. You know, that, you know, we need to blend in as much as we possibly can, because
keep the white kids coming.
Yeah. Because we're already getting that. You know, still, like if you look at the breakdown of books, you know, per publisher, I mean, it is predominantly white books about white kids. And so it's a very conscious decision for me to every time I sit down to put forth Black and brown kids in my stories.
I love what everyone has said. And Leah, I want to apologize because earlier when you were talking, my toddler ran in, and I'm so sorry if that like distracted anybody. I was like, where's my husband?
That's okay.
Sorry about that. But yeah, first of all, I love what you said about writing the people outside of the frame. That's like so beautiful. Oh my gosh. I want to just literally frame that quote about writing outside the frame. And similar to Jay, it's interesting. I really admire everyone that is debuting, writing their own voices story. Because for me, I honestly just, and maybe it's because there was a time where anything Middle Eastern was considered like very unpopular just because of just, you know, propaganda. So with my first 4 novels, I mean, I didn't have any Iranian characters in them, even though when I was little, like when I was 8, I would write stories about people like my family. Or there was one story I wrote that made my whole family so happy about a girl named Sanem in Iran. But when I wanted to break into publishing, and, you know, it was all about Twilight and girls that, you know, all kind of looked the same in beautiful dresses on the covers. It never even occurred to me. So I literally waited until the final 6, which was my most commercial idea, and it was big space adventure. And I was like, okay, this is where I can put in my Iranian American lead, and it won't be like a book about, you know, how hard it is to be Iranian in this country. Like, it'll literally just be like, she is Iranian American. That makes her who she is. And she's the star of this story, and she has this, you know, beautiful family dynamic, and so that was kind of my way of breaking in. And since then, I want to write so many more of those stories, because I've heard from so many young girls and boys growing up who just didn't have that representation. But I really admire everyone who is braver than me and started off debuting with their own voices stories, because I think I was a little bit too like just focused on, okay, well, how can I get published?
I want to just chime in really quickly. I know my turn has already passed, but I think that like Alexandra raises a really interesting point, and that's that like as much as we are artists who just want to make art, we also are businesses, and so like we also have like an obligation to figure out how we can continue to sustain a career. And so I don't think it's a matter of bravery. I think it was a matter of like survival. You know, like so many of us have had to make that choice. It's like, okay, well, if I want to write books, like, and I want to get a foot in the door, then I'm about to just get that foot in there however I can get it in there. And so, yeah. And I also think me and Jay are fortunate in that like we came along like in the last like 2 years. And so publishing looks a lot different now than it did in the Stephanie Meyer era. So you were really coming up against some hard walls. So I want to commend you for, you know, hustling and getting to that story.
Thank you. That makes me so happy, especially because my family's like, now you finally like write about us and acknowledge it. I'm like, I wanted to before.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Jennifer, if you don't want to answer that one this time, I could move on to my next question. You can be the first to answer that one.
I mean, I could also go down just a different road, just to sort of take it on in a different place too, is that you know, I've devoted a lot of my adult life to an organization called PEN, which is the oldest writers organization in the world. It's 100 years old this year. And what's very particular about this organization, and I think it's what I find so amazing, is that it's the only organization that really sees literature as a form of rebellion, that sees poetry as an act of rebellion, as an act of freedom, and that actually it can actually change the world. I mean, it can change a human being, you can have a personal transformative experience, but you can also change a society. And there are incredible examples of this happening. I mean, just because we're in the English language right now speaking, certainly, you know, Oliver Twist is a novel that changed child labor laws in the United Kingdom, and this spread all over the world, an understanding that maybe children should not be used in this kind of way. So along with that, in the last couple of years, because of this idea of writing about what you know or writing about who you are, we've also created within the organization a manifesto in defense of the imagination. So we're a bit concerned that the imagination also, you know, is important as the writing you know. And I think it's a good one, is James Baldwin's description of a woman giving birth. I mean, I think it's the most incredible description I've ever read of a woman giving birth, and it was written by a man. So I just think it's really important to have the door of the imagination honored and open and present, so that young writers who are listening to us and wanting to write can also know that freedom also is being who you are, but freedom is also being who you are not. So it's a bit of a different branch of this conversation.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump to a different question than what I had next, because that kind of leads into it. So stories and characters that represent an author's experience are important for for readers to experience, because they see themselves in them and they see other people in them. You know, we always talk at my library about windows and mirrors. You know, you see yourself in those mirrors and you see other people and cultures and identities through those windows, and that's important. So, you know, writing in own voices, do you think that precludes authors from writing and utilizing characters that aren't based on their own experiences?
I'm kind of subversive in that way, and I like to cross over. I'm very proud to have written a picture book about Johnny Cash that was written by me and illustrated, you know, by another person of color. And I've written books about Truman Capote and Harper Lee, And personally going into the deep South to do those books was a pretty amazing experience in kind of winning over those communities as being like the odd man out and the person they didn't expect to see, writing those books. So I kind of, I always say, I write about race and everything I do, but I look at it as the human race, and that's how I approach any story. So that's my own personal take.
I
Yeah.
also think that even, whether when we're writing our own voices or our ethnicities, it's still like we're so often taking characters on these wild adventures that are very much of the imagination. And I mean, I've certainly never been to space, and I'm sure I never will. And so there's a lot of things too that I think it's like you bring your background and the needed representation, but at the same time, you're telling a story that, yes, like requires so much imagination too.
Yeah, I think so. My answer to this is like two-pronged probably. And that's one, like I'm hyper aware of my positionality when I approach a story of any kind. And so there's a huge difference for me being a Black woman, being a queer woman, writing a story about a white person than if I were a white person writing a story about a Black queer person, because this is also a business. And so like, we know that if there is a story about a Black person that's on a list at a house, there's a good chance they're not going to acquire a bunch more. It's like, okay, we have our title for this season, so we're good. And if a white person is the person who wrote that book, then that has precluded me from being able to do that work, and it's precluded other Black writers from being able to do that work. And so I think it's important to not, I don't ever want to conflate like what I do and like my writing outside my experience with like what a writer might do writing outside of their experience. And to that end, I don't know if y'all feel the same way, but I have had to engage with white writers and white content and white culture my entire life. And so I have a PhD in whiteness. Okay, I can tell you what a white boy is thinking before a white boy could tell you what a white boy is thinking. A white boy has not had to do that same work to understand me and my people and where I come from. And so I think that like my ability to engage with that culture is much different than their ability to engage with mine. And so like I have a different level of responsibility, but past that, the power dynamic is much different. And I think that it's like really important to think about the way that power is distributed in story, especially when you're talking about like how it lives in the world.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And I think
Go
for
ahead,
me,
Jay.
I would just say like, and this is why I have a hard time with the phrase own voices sometimes. And when like people on social media especially are throwing around like words like diversity and inclusion in terms of characters in a world in a book or something like that. Because I think everything that Leah just said, I want to like amplify and echo because I wholeheartedly agree. But I think like, of course, I'm never saying like, white author Joe Smith, can't write, can't ever write a side character or whatever with a Black friend or whatever. But I know historically, it's oftentimes just done so poorly, and there's just so many stereotypes, and that becomes like the part where like we almost just want to say no, just banning all like white authors from like attempting ever to write Black characters or characters of color. But I think like I want to get to a place where we're able to just trust that like we can do this well, that white writers can write about a diverse world that we live in well enough that like we won't have to like have these kinds of conversations. But unfortunately, we're at a place where there are certain writers who just want to produce work with centering characters of color who are white as a way of getting paid, getting their next like massive book deal, and taking space away from those who are historically marginalized and who actually are part of those communities. So I think it's more of an issue on like who are you really centering in your work? And oftentimes like white writers who are writing about characters of color, they're not centering those characters of color, they're centering whiteness. And so I think like at that point, that ends up in a whole other conversation on like, well, do we just say like, stay in your lane? Or do we say like, we just need programs in publishing to help white writers write diversely? And so let's have a separate panel about that someday, but yeah.
I would watch that panel.
Like, I think we've all read enough white savior books to
Yeah.
last a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I'm
fun.
tapped out.
Mhm. Okay, so we're still talking about own voices, obviously. So how much does that play into your choices as you form your story? So once you know this is your character and you start making choices for that character, how much does that play into it?
I like to say that I don't make choices for my characters, but my characters make choices for me. I mean, I honestly feel like they are leading the way through the story, and I'm constantly surprised by what they do and what they say. And I'm just somehow recording it.
Yeah, I agree there with that mysterious thing that happens. I mean, in my case, I can say that I almost hear a voice, and it's a kind of a dictation thing. So, for example, in Gun Love, the opening line was I could hear her. It was like she was visiting me, like a seance, and she said, my mother was a cup of sugar. You could borrow her anytime, and that was it. I just had her in my head, and I knew. But I also knew, and I didn't know how this was going to happen. I really wanted to write about the guns coming to Mexico and Central America. By the way, I live in Mexico. I've lived in Mexico my whole life. So I have a different perspective on a lot of things because my perspective is very Mexican. But so one of the things that about the guns is that the reason why there's so much violence in Mexico and in Central America is because of the US guns. And there was a study done at San Diego University that if the guns did not come to Mexico, 47% of gun dealers would be out of business. So we're talking almost 50% of the US gun business comes to Mexico and Central America. So I knew I wanted to talk about that because I wanted to write about this because it's something that that really deeply disturbs me, Just like with Prayers for the Stolen, I wanted to write about the fact that in the state of Guerrero, little girls that didn't even have birth certificates because they don't even count, it's more important to have a car than to have a little girl. I wanted to write about how they were being stolen and trafficked. And so many times I'm sort of, it's like two things are happening at once. I know there are these things I want to write about that I care about, that maybe I've even done journalism about. And then suddenly I will have the voice and the magic and the person that inhabits me. But it is a kind of a mysterious thing. It's not such an intellectual decision.
Yeah, I mean, I write books about Black girls falling in love. And so I think every decision is very much influenced by the lens of like what it has been like for me to be a Black woman who has all these different ideas about what my body represents projected onto me over the course of my life. And so all those things do very much inform the way that I write my characters and also inform the way that my characters make decisions within the context of the story. But to that end, like each of them is different and individual. And so I try to be as honest as possible about what their experience could be like, but also like give them as much, want to make them feel as organic as I can, and still make books that are sellable. So once again, we can talk about the capitalism of art making in another panel, but a lot of decisions when you want to get down to it do have to do with like, okay, well, is it going to be possible for me to sell a book where somebody does this or thinks this or acts this way? I don't know. So that's, like I said, it's another topic.
On that note, has anything you guys have ever written as you're working on it just surprised you? Like you're working on it and went, wait, what?
Always.
Always, all the time, I'm surprised. Yeah, constantly surprised. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we obviously talked about how, some of you were writing books that were not necessarily representative of where you come from before. What is different about writing when it features characters that are representative of you?
I
How
think
does
it
it
just,
reflect you?
yeah, I think for me, it definitely felt like something sort of clicking more where it just felt like more of my authentic voice coming through. But I also think that's something that you can take with you to in other mediums. So for example, this DC project I wrote, Black Canary is not a Iranian character. Dinah Lance has been around. She's like a superhero that's been around since 1947. So it's a super American project, but just the fact that they hired me to do it, someone that comes in with, a very different perspective and lens, I feel like it lent something special to this story and made it fresh. And so I think I think writing a character that was very much from my own background and then going from that and kind of writing other characters, it sort of allowed me to, I don't know, find a voice that feels like a more authentic through line throughout all the different books, if that makes any sense.
Well, I think that what you're talking a lot about is the concept of the witness. And so I mean, a lot's been written about what it is to be a witness. And it's a very powerful thing to be the person that witnesses something and then tells the world about what they saw. And that's always something sort of extraordinary, is to be in that place. I mean, in Widow Basquiat, which is my memoir, actually, there was a point, I wrote it, and it's about the painter Jean-Michel Basquiat and his love affair with Suzanne Malouk, who to this day is my best friend. And so I had it in a third person voice, and then I had it in her voice, which is written by me. It's two voices. It's like two pianos or whatever. But then I put myself in it. And why did I put myself in it? Because I felt it was really important to be the witness of the story, to say, I saw this with my own eyes. I mean, even a story like once we were at a bar and she got up and went to the bathroom and she didn't come back and she didn't come back. And I was like, well, what is going on that she does not come back? And I was just getting up ready to go to the bathroom to see if something had happened. And she came out and she just said, oh God, that bathroom was so damn dirty. I had to clean it. So she had been in the bathroom cleaning it. I mean, I witnessed that. I saw that. And that's a story that gives you such an insight into who she is and how amazing her story is. So I felt like, I have to be able to tell the reader, I saw that. I'm the witness of it,
Also, I think, part of the magic of being a writer is like finding that thing where you kind of hit your stride. And for me, when I started doing school visits, whenever I was doing like middle school, I found it really easy to talk to those kids, those ages in these areas that I was going to. And when I started writing in those voices, it, for whatever reason, just came really, really easy. So most of my books are told in first person through those voices. And as soon as I start writing, I could just write pages and pages. Like that voice just comes very easy to me. And I can't explain it because I can't even remember my own middle school experience, but it's buried deep inside of me somehow.
How does genre factor in when you're writing these different stories?
Yeah, I love this question. So I write rom-coms primarily. I mean, I have a middle grade superhero series coming out in a few years, so that's like very different. but right now I write rom-coms, and the conventions of the rom-com are actually very stringent. Like it's pretty particular. You have to hit certain beats, your characters have to adhere to certain rules, and you have to have a certain type of ending. And so figuring out how to play around with those, figuring out how to subvert those genre conventions, figuring out how to sort of upend them, because we've seen certain types of characters populate those stories for so long that, what does it look like if we put somebody in the center of that narrative who's never been there before? How does that influence the way that we read the book, but also the way that we understand what the genre can be and become? So yeah, genre conventions actually they dictate almost everything about how I tell a story. And then the character and their lived experience pretty much decides everything else.
Yeah, when I think of genre, I think of movies. So even if a book I'm writing is not that genre per se, I think, oh, this story is a bank heist movie in terms of how it's structured, or this book is a road movie, or this book is a detective story. And even though nobody else might know that, it really helps me frame it and help me find a way into it.
Yeah, and I've found, because I write across different genres, so one thing that's really helped me is I will study a favorite book in the genre. So when I was writing, for example, a mystery novel, I think I read, I can't remember if it was Gone Girl or Girl on the Train. It was one of the girl books. And I went through and I just made notes on, okay, at this chapter is when like the red herring was dropped in. At this chapter, we get a clue that we don't know is going to mean anything until like the very end. And like very, very like super broad, just like the bullet points of the beats of what happens. And I think just having that, just studying the genre of book that you're writing, it's just so helpful to kind of like take notes as if you're like in school studying a reference book, because it definitely helps you realize, okay, this genre has certain beats and formulas that, yes, you want to be as original as you possibly can, but like Leah was saying, with the romantic comedy, generally, like, like they've got to end together and there have to be certain bumps along the way at certain points within the story. So especially if you're genre switching, I think reading and notating just like those different beats is really helpful.
I'd just like to say that none of those characters in those books were girls. They were all women. And can you imagine those girls having the same title for men, being called boys when they were men?
Oh, that's a good point.
That is a good point.
They love to call women girls.
Yeah, I know. I never thought about
that. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So this is a little more serious. I guess it's all serious, but there are a lot of situations that have impacted people of color, both recently and in the past. Have issues and situations related to people of color and social unrest and inequality affected your writing at all, and the kind of stories that you have and want to write? And if so, how?
Yeah, so I think I was in a really unique position last year. So my book was published a few days after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. And so there was a lot, the uprisings were happening at the time. And so there was a conversation nationwide about racial justice and Black Lives Matter. And, me and two or three other Black women also debuted in YA the same exact day. And we were being asked to, talk about our books and talk about fiction. And like, my book is a book about a girl who runs for prom queen because she wants to get a scholarship to go to college. Like, at the surface, this story seems sort of like fluffy, like this is a book that's supposed to make you happy. And it very much is. But so I had a hard time, squaring that with what was going on in the world. Like, how can I possibly be talking about something like this when that is happening outside of the context of these Zoom rooms? And I had to really think about joy as an act of resistance, joy being the core of any type of revolution, this idea that we should be able to live free from fear, as Black folks in this country, the idea that we should be able to live free from violence and free from prejudice. And so really, when I started thinking differently about what the book meant and what it was representing, it became so much bigger to me than even what I had thought it was when I was writing it. And so I go into all my books now with a very similar type of ideology, that like my job as a writer is to capture the world as it is, but also to capture the world as it can be. And that's a world in which like young Black queer women get to live freely and safely and be loved, not in exchange for trauma or pain, but in spite of those things. Okay. Yeah, Jay, your book, Tyler Johnson Was Here, specifically deals with one of these, a situation like this. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I mean, obviously Tyler Johnson Was Here is about racism, white supremacy, police brutality, the effects that has on communities, and it's not just particular families, but it's literal communities, and we see in this book like the aftermath of that and the trauma of that. And I think like for me, like I wrote that book because I don't know how much you guys know about my story, but I mean, when I was when I was 9, like a little kid, I lost my cousin to an act of police violence, and so that was like something that I sat with for years and years and years until I saw like national headlines of Black and brown lives like gone, because of the hands of white supremacy and police. And at first, no one was really talking about it, but now we have social media where when those things kind of happen, we see like hashtags, right? And so I wrote Tyler Johnson Was Here as a way of saying like, oh gosh, like I heard and saw like all those names even before the hashtags existed. Like my cousin, even though he didn't get a hashtag years ago, like I wanted him to have a voice, like in this book. And so oftentimes I talk about this book, I say like I wanted to give my cousin like a few more pages of his life back, because I think like those things never really leave you. And unfortunately, we're still seeing the same things happen today. We'll see the same things happen, months from now. And it's just like this cycle. But I think the unfortunate part about that is like, when you do write books like this, you get kind of put in categories in the publishing and writing world. And like you write issue books, or you write books about how hard it is to be Black. And so I was very conscious about it, and I hated that. And it sent me to this dark place for a long time, to the point where I gave up writing literally, because I felt so overwhelmed talking about those issues all the time and being in that category. Like I was only on panels about race, at every event, and they get exhausting. And so if this book is about like the trauma of being Black, I wanted this book to be about like just all the joy that being Black is. And so hopefully I'm able to like branch out of that box that people have placed me in with this book that comes out later this year. And so I do think it's important to for me to be writing about like the difficulties that I experienced, but also like the joys that I experienced too, because I want people to see the fullness of me. I'm not just walking pain. I'm not just walking trauma. And so I hope that people start to see that in not only my books, but Leah's and all of our books. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I know when I was a kid, there just weren't, you didn't have the rom-coms. I was like, where are the books about the girl next door that's in love with her brother's best friend? Those
all
kind
we
of
got
things.
was we had Sarah Dessen back in the day. Like it was just white girl story after white girl story. And I was like, you know what, Sarah girl, I love you, but it's time to switch it up.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I had written my fair share of issue stories, and those books kind of made a comeback last year and were featured in a lot of places. And so I thought a lot about it, because I think as a human, your reaction is, oh, I'm a writer, I should, I want to write about those things that are happening. But then, when it kind of settled, I kind of doubled down on the opposite thing, which is just like, the deeper work is to write stories that represent, that aren't about the trauma, but are about living and life and, I found myself in the unexpected position of working with the National Science Foundation and doing kind of stories that had more of a science angle to it, and just having characters of color in those stories without, making it a big deal, but just representing and leading by example, and as a person, as the author writing those stories and the characters in those stories. And after a lot of thought, I thought like that is the more important work for me to be doing right now, as opposed to just, there are plenty of journalists and people writing about those things that are happening, and the thing I can add to this whole thing is this other stuff that is, not necessarily being covered.
Yeah, I will definitely say it's just as important to see the stories about those traumas, but it's also important to see the stories that aren't, because we have people that look like us that aren't from a traumatized background, and people need to see that too, and not just associate that with people of color.
Right.
You want to see the doctors on Grey's Anatomy and lawyers on different cop shows and things like, you want to see these people that look like us doing these important things. So we are approaching the end of our session, and I want to give you guys time to talk about any upcoming projects you want to tell us about, or if there's something you just want to share. So let's randomly start with Greg.
Well, so I wrote this book called Ghetto Cowboy that came out in 2011, and we were recently able to make it into a movie, which will be on Netflix on April 2nd. And it's got...
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that this was the same thing.
Yeah, Concrete Cowboy with Idris Elba and...
Oh my God, I can't wait.
I saw the trailer for that. I'm so excited.
Oh my God. Whoa.
You should have led with that. That is so cool.
Oh my God.
Oh, okay, Jennifer.
Well, I also have a little bit of movie news. So Julie Taymor, who did the Gloria movie last year, which is wonderful if you haven't seen it, and who also did the movie on Frida Kahlo, she is going to direct Gun Love. So that's all.
Nice.
So
That's great.
Great.
Very cool. Jay.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't really announce a lot of the things that are going on, but a lot of exciting things happening behind the scenes. Stay tuned. But one thing I can talk about, I mentioned this book a couple times already, Things We Couldn't Say. This comes out September of this year. It's a book that centers a Black queer boy that I rarely get to see in YA, and living his best life, healing, self-discovery, finding first love, coming out from Scholastic. Very, very thrilled to be over at the team at Scholastic with Leah. So yeah.
Awesome. Can't wait. Alexandra.
So yeah, I have this new release that just came out a couple months ago. It's basically my, it's been sort of called Handmaid's Tale meets the DC universe. So it was such a joy for me to write, and it's very much like a feminist superhero story. So has my heart all over it. And then the thing I can talk about that is coming up next is I'm actually writing the YA historical fantasy about Princess Jasmine for Disney. So that'll be released.
Awesome. My inner nerd is rejoicing right now.
I'm so excited. That comes out in 2022. So I'm like literally just starting on it now.
Whoa.
Okay, Leah.
Yeah, oh my gosh, like legends left and right on this panel. So let's see, a couple things. One, the You Should See Me in a Crown paperback is out on June 1st. Please pick it up. It's a lower price point, which I hope makes it more accessible to even more readers. But my sophomore novel, Rise to the Sun, is out on July 6th. It's about two girls who fall in love at a music festival. It's set over the course of 3 days. It's a rom without a com. So that's new for me, but I'm really excited about seeing it out in the world. And my new book just got announced. It's called Ellie, Engel Saves Herself. It's about a young Black queer girl who wakes up one morning after a freak earthquake in her small Indiana town and suddenly has the power to bring things back to life with her touch. It's a middle grade novel, the first in a series about young Black superheroes, and it will be out in spring 2023. So I also, just like Alexandra, literally just started working on it. So y'all can stay tuned. Add it on Goodreads in the meantime.
Oh my gosh, and I read your announcement and was so excited. So wasn't there like a 13 house auction or something? Oh my God, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, it was not quite 13, 11, but you know, I'm like, you know, just like, it was very exciting. I certainly was not expecting that when I sat down. When we were talking about like, do you ever surprise yourself in your writing? I was surprised at that whole pitch. And then people was like, yeah, let's buy it. And I was like, what? Really? Okay, cool.
That's so exciting.
That's great. Okay, final question. If you could recommend one Own Voices book that you love, that you think everybody should read, what would you recommend? And we'll go around. Let's start with Jennifer.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that question. You caught me off guard.
I know, I just came up with it. We can come back.
Well, I guess I'll just say quickly. I mean, I think diaries are very interesting. We haven't talked about diaries. Mm-hmm. So certainly like Frida Kahlo's diary, I would recommend as a really wonderful read. And just diaries in general, if you're very interested in people's own stories, that's definitely something.
Okay. Alexandra.
So I actually have two. I wish I was near my bookshelf so I could show visuals, but I'll just say them. So for YA, one of my favorite fantasies is The Bells by Danielle Clayton. It's so good. So I recommend that one to everyone. I feel like I've been talking about it for 3 years, but it's just stayed at the top for me. And then especially now with everything that's going on in our climate, there is a picture book. So any of you that have little kids in your life, it's called I Dream of Popo by Olivia Blackburn. And it's this beautiful, beautiful picture book about a little girl and her grandmother in Taiwan and what happens when the little girl has to move away from her grandmother and how they stay in touch and their bond. And I mean, I literally, every time I read it to my son, I cry. It's beautiful. But more importantly, I think it really shines a light on how amazing the Asian community is and the Asian elders. And right now, I just feel like we need
Especially important.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. Jay.
Yeah. So one book that I think deserves so much more love is Piecing Me Together by Renee Watson. I love the book. The writing, the prose is so beautiful. Renee is one of the best people you'll ever meet. Piecing Me Together.
Leah.
Yeah, I'm going to do a tag team 1-2 punch. Okay, so first is Picture Us in the Light by Kelly Loy Gilbert. Incredible book. One of the most beautiful YA novels I've ever read. It's about queerness, but also race. It's about immigration. It's everything. And my second recommendation is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, because I think it is truly a masterclass in YA. And so everybody should read it. And it has a sequel coming out soon.
Awesome. We're going to get Greg's answer, and then we're going to turn it back over to Diane.
You know, I read so much that, and then whenever anyone asks me that question, my mind goes completely blank. But I happen to have this book on my desk right now because I'm working on a secret space project. But Chasing Space by Leland Melvin is an amazing firsthand account memoir of a guy who had, you know, the last thing he expected was to be an astronaut, and the crazy adventure that his life, the journey of his life that led him into space. Beautifully written book too. So,
well, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. You know, we have a running saying in the library world that authors are our rock stars, and you guys are all rock stars to us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Are rock stars too.
Yeah.
What a wonderful, absolutely fantastic panel. Thank you to all the authors and our moderator for participating tonight. Jennifer, Jay, Leah, Greg, and Alexandra, and Kirsten, thank you so much. I truly appreciate you participating this evening. Audience, thank you for participating as well. I hope you enjoyed yourself. And please remember that tonight's event is just one in a series of free author panels for RosieCon Book Festival. The next panel is on is on April 7th. There's no month called author, sorry. On April 7th, I'm going to share my screen so that I can show who's going to be on that next panel as well. And it is called How to Frame a Story. So that discussion will be dedicated to the craft of writing. And like this panel, you can register for free on the RosieCon website. Be safe, everyone. Stay healthy. Get your vaccine if you can. Again, thanks for joining us and good night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
It was so nice to meet you all.
Yeah, nice to meet everybody.
That was awesome.
Bye.
So